Vitalik replied with the word YOLO and a transaction hash. He sent us 1,000 Ether just in response to my tweet saying that, we wish we could do more, but we just don't have enough money. And this is from his personal money, and like out of nowhere just did it. And this was Vitalik, in parentheses, never gives away ETH. That was his like screen name at the time. So everyone was shocked.
This episode is with Preston Van Loon, who is a co-founder of Prysm, which is a consensus client for Ethereum. It's the most popular one. Kevin, I'm curious what stood out to you about this episode.
Yeah, this was neat. We learned a lot about early ETH2, back when it was called that, history. We talked about pre, during, and post-merge. We learned a lot about protocol development, the sorts of bugs that you'll run into with that. And I think Preston just has a lot of knowledge about what it's like to be a developer in Web 2 and Web 3 and across different languages. We talked about his preferences over time. And yeah, he just has a lot of knowledge that he offered in this episode. So it was a really neat one. What about you?
Yeah. I also think he just cares so much about the ecosystem, and that's so clear as he talks. Yeah. And I think is certainly someone that a lot of people in the Ethereum community more broadly look up to. So it was really special to have him on this episode, and he shared a few words of wisdom around also, sort of putting the community first. And as a dev coming into the community with this sort of like, what can I provide type of mindset, which I think he has really not just talked the talk, but he's walked the walk. So yeah, this episode was really great, and hopefully you all enjoy it as much as we enjoyed recording it. We are here with Preston Van Loon, who is an Ethereum core developer on the Prysm team and Offchain Labs. Preston, very excited to have you on the pod.
Yeah, happy to be here.
GM, thank you for joining.
I am very excited to talk all things Prysm, to talk about some other things that you have going on. Maybe before we do that, Preston, you can give a little bit of context on how you got into maybe the space at a high level, but also where you are now. You've done a lot of really incredible work in the space. So yeah, would love a little brief history of that.
Sure. So I found Bitcoin, I think in 2013 or 2012, whenever it first got to $1,000. And I thought the concept was kind of cool, except that I didn't think it would be great peer-to-peer money. And so I thought it was overvalued when it hit $1,000. And so I kind of dismissed it. It went away. The price went back to some normal number, I don't know, $300. And I said, I was right. Look, everybody, I was right. And I didn't think much about crypto again until 2017. I was working at Google and really excited to be working at Google. It's a great place. A lot of people in software engineering really want to work there, and I was really happy to be there. But then I found myself, again, not very challenged, I suppose, or like not working on something that was really interesting to me. I was working in advertising at Google, right, which is, kind of their big thing. But I'm not passionate about ads. Few people are. Maybe advertisers are, but not really software engineers. So I was always wanting to learn something new. And a buddy of mine, we were at some like satanic bar, and he told me, he said, hey, you gotta check out this thing called Ethereum. It's like Bitcoin, but you can actually do stuff there. And I said, well, okay, that's interesting, because I had previously dismissed Bitcoin as like not great peer-to-peer money or store value. So I was, check it out. This is right before everyone's doing ICOs and like crypto kitties and stuff. And it's really interesting. Everyone's talking about it. Why are they talking about it? And I started digging into how it works and reading the papers and finding, wow, this is a really multi-purpose platform. You can really do stuff with it and have decentralized, unstoppable applications. And then I kind of just got obsessed with it, right? I didn't just buy a little bit. I did buy, a little bit, and I was like, oh, cool. My number went up. That's awesome. I'm even more hooked. I saw it go from 300 to 700. I'm a genius again. I'm going to buy a crypto kitty. I couldn't afford a crypto kitty, but at that time, but I was just excited. So I was learning more about it. And then I got to another roadblock. I said, this technology is really cool, except that it also really sucks. It doesn't scale and it's really expensive. So the potential is there. What can I do? How can I get involved? And see, the gears are turning in my head. The lights are going off. I'm seeking impact, right? That's what I was hoping to get from Google. I see an opportunity here to learn something new and potentially have a positive impact on an ecosystem or the world as a whole if it becomes this great big thing. So end of 2017, Christmas break or holiday break, whatever it was, I was trying to start working on the sharding ideas that Vitalik had put out years prior. I mean, this was, I think, even before Ethereum had launched, there was the idea that they were going to switch to proof of stake, and there was an idea that we were going to do sharding. So at that time, proof of stake was already in like test nets or dev nets, whatever you want to call it. People were ready to ship it, but that no one was working on sharding. So I said, well, let's just sprinkle it on top of Geth and make it a sharded blockchain. And so asking around on chat rooms or whatever, like before Discord, this is before Discord was popular, we had this thing called Gitter. So I was on Gitter asking the questions, and then I came across Raul Jordan, who was asking literally the same questions as me. Why is nobody working on this? How do we do it? Who wants to do it? And then we met up in New York, where I was living, a couple days later at the Google office. And he said, "You're a real person. I'm a real person. We met on the internet. Let's just start working on it, see what happens." And it really cascaded from there and spiraled. I would like to think of it as my life sort of spiraled down into this Ethereum black hole that I'll never escape from. I think a lot of people can resonate with this. Like, you just get a little bit and then you get this like positive feedback, and then just this cycle of like, I want to learn more and more and I want to do more and more. And, the next step for us was that the EF announced their first grants program. So, oh wow, this is kind of like what we want to do. So let's apply and see what happens. And we were accepted into the first round of the grants program. So we're like, wow, actually, people want to give us money to do this thing that we were going to do for free. Let's really do it now. And then there were more and more grants programs coming out. And by the end of the year, everyone was saying, where is sharding? Like, what's taking so long? And I think it was Amin from Spankchain who had tweeted this, what's taking so long? We need it now. When sharding, we need it now. And I replied, I said, well, we're working on it, something to this effect. We're working on it, but and we have grants and these are great, but it's just not enough for us to quit our full-time jobs. We got people working in really nice places, and you're asking us to kind of quit and dedicate full time to this. In response to that, on Twitter, Vitalik replied with the word YOLO and a transaction hash. He sent us 1,000 Ether just in response to my tweet saying that, we wish we could do more, but we just don't have enough money. And this is from his personal money, and like out of nowhere just did it. And this was Vitalik, in parentheses, never gives away ETH. That was his like screen name at the time. So everyone was shocked and it kind of went viral. And that was really cool. It was around $100,000 at the time, $100 per ETH. But it really sent a strong signal that, this guy and the foundation, they're not going to let us fail for monetary reasons. So, just a couple weeks later or a month later, we're all quitting our jobs, going full time. Maybe we only have 6 months to a year of runway, which is and we'll never make any money with the product. So it's kind of scary. But the community and the people behind the project are not going to let us fail for something like not having enough funding to build it. So that was 2019. In January, we're all full time. I think there were 4 or 5 of us building out the Prysm client, and it's just been a lot of fun since then. That's how I got started.
That's a really cool origin story. And I appreciate how you kind of saw a problem that existed in the space and you were like, okay, this is what I want to cut my teeth on. And I do remember that time period too, because like it was probably after a lot of the more scammy shit was going on and like blowing up. And so there was like plenty of other less legitimate avenues you could have gone down, but you were like, no, this seems way more fulfilling. Yeah, like when you initially started Prysm, it sounded like it was a Geth fork, right?
Yeah.
And so the first thing that you started toward was sharding, which at the time, like execution sharding was still part of the roadmap. And then once you had gotten some funding, you knew you had a runway. What was kind of like the next big thing that you needed to tackle?
Yeah. So once we we got started. And in this first year, we started, working right away. We were a fork of Geth. We actually even wanted to do it in the Geth repo, but Peter and these guys are like, well, wait a minute, who are you? Like, you can't just come in here and start hacking on Geth and doing it inside of Geth. Understandably so. So we maintained a fork, and for a while that made sense for about a year. But then the design had iterated so many times that we finally ended on this model of let's launch proof of stake first. Well, let's launch something and we'll launch it adjacent to mainnet, because we just can't afford to be messing with mainnet and Geth being, 99% or whatever, more than 90% of the market share for clients. I'm making that number up. Maybe it wasn't that bad, but it was bad. It was higher than 50%. And there were really, two dominant clients there. You had Geth and Parity. So we started over and then we just deleted everything. I think we did this 3 times, but on the second time we were like, it's not going to be a fork of Geth. We're just not really changing anything about Geth. We may be using things that Geth does. Maybe we'll be a plugin or something, but we had to start over. And just the nature of research, we were probably there too early, but we were really eager to start doing it. So anytime we had this idea and people were saying, what do you think about that? Does it work? I say, I don't know. We're going to start building and see what happens. And just wanted to get something there as fast as possible. We were really, really eager to get it done and really excited. I mean, for me in the first year, I was still working at Google. And what that meant was, I can't really work on it at work. That's a big no-no, but I could wake up earlier and also work when I got home. So I was waking up a few hours before work and grinding through some PRs and stuff, then going to work and sort of trying not to think about it all day, trying to get my main job work, trying not to get fired, from slacking off. And then I would go home and then I would keep working on it. And that was really successful, but it was also really hard to do for a long period of time. So I was thankful that things worked out the way they were going, because I was on a rocket ship to burnout, and it's just tough to do 2 jobs that you're excited about. And my wife and I were also getting married that year. So it's okay, well, this is a recipe for freaking out. Somehow I did it with her support mostly, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then now that we were going full time, now I had some freedom where I could go to the conferences and I didn't have to worry about taking time off. And whenever we got together, it was extremely productive. It almost became a meme for some of the time that you would see the Prysm team at a conference, but they weren't paying attention to any of the talks. They were in the corner just hacking on something. People were taking photos with us, just in the corner huddled typing. It was a really fun time.
At what point did Prysm become something that was holy shit, people know about Prysm, beyond just sort of Vitalik yeeting 100 ETH into it?
It's hard to say, because we had been talking about it on Twitter and we sort of announced it right away. I guess when we got into the grants program, people started to notice what we were doing and that it was important. And then with that, we felt this obligation to the community. Random people had given us money and we had to deliver on that. We just felt compelled. We were the opposite of doing the scammy thing, that whatever scammy thing that was there. Because we weren't doing this to make money. We were let's build an open source client and build gateways to Ethereum and build bridges and let people go where they want to go. And that was never about making money. So the fact that we had received money was more of an obligation, saying, okay, well, now we really have to deliver because people have put their trust in us. And so we felt that we had an opportunity. Now people are looking at us, we have an opportunity to set the bar really high. So we were sending, biweekly updates, doing everything in the open, trying to further cultivate this ethos that Ethereum is a permissionless and open network, and not just people building in the background and then pushing out updates and saying, look at what we've done and this is the way it is. We really wanted to be inviting and open, and that's, what Ethereum is built on. So from there, we became quite popular. And I think because of that, we had our Discord channels, we had the support. Anyone could come in and ask us questions anytime. We were always online, always working, always inviting people to test it out, sometimes too early. But yeah, I think that's what got a lot of attention.
Very cool. Yeah, I want to push us a little into the weeds. I want to hear maybe initially what was the V1 that went to production? Like what additional features had you built? And then maybe since then, Prysm becoming the consensus client and like post proof of stake merge. But I guess like leading up to that, what were some of the specific features that you were adding, extending off of Geth, or like sounds like at a certain point you sort of like ripped a lot of the Geth stuff out?
Yeah, we first launched, I think we called it like Ruby AlphaNet or something. Like all of our first testnets were named after gemstones, all based on this like Prysm idea. And Prysm was a cool name too because it was like a single beam of light coming through and fracturing into multiple beams of light. So that was sharding in itself, and we were really excited about that. What we shipped with our first, I don't know, AlphaNet, testnet, whatever, was like the specification of ETH2, as we called it then, where we had this beacon chain idea coming through, and we had all these validators sort of agreeing on something. We didn't really know what that was going to be used for yet, or how we were going to have their agreement on something be actually what is happening on mainnet. But we knew that we're going to start with proof of stake, right? We're going to start with proof of stake. So our MVP for this is to get Prysm running with itself, a single client testnet, as we called it. And the way we shipped that is we shipped it without verifying any signatures. That was really hard for us at the time, was to do the cryptography part, because we're not, big in cryptography. Maybe some of us are not very good at math, believe it or not, but we could build stuff. And what we did was we built the proof of stake. We got it to work, and we kind of glossed over the fact that this can't go to production because no one's verifying any signatures. We're just accepting all messages as truth and not really verifying it, which was kind of funny. But we were able to get it to a point where the peer-to-peer aspect was working. So we had messages passing back and forth. We had people, different continents, who were participating, and we're seeing things crash and burn in a spectacular manner in a distributed way, which is exciting. It was more than just one laptop. But I distinctly remember that as a very stressful time because we took it seriously. We took it, every fire that was happening in this AlphaNet, as if the world was burning, and that we needed to get it back online immediately. And it was all driven by like not wanting to let people down. We wanted to deliver on results and have an MVP of, okay, we've got a beacon chain and validators are producing things and they're all agreeing on something, and the chain is progressing. And sometimes it's spinning off into forks. We had problems with fork choice. We had a lot of problems, and then we had a lot of time to work on it because we were there really early. We were able to iron out these problems.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. Like how solidified was at the time, like Ethereum 2.0, or just like the spec, like from the Ethereum Foundation and just like from all of the client teams sort of coming to consensus? Sounds like you were there pretty early, so you got to be a part of like firming that spec up.
Yeah, spec, it changed really often, and generally always for good reasons. The first time the spec was ever frozen, it was only frozen for a little while, and then it was unfrozen to have more modifications. We found this typically quite frustrating because it feels bad to throw away your work or redo everything. But if you look back now at the way we wanted to do things, and then knowing what you know now, you're like, well, obviously we had to unfreeze it, we had to change things. The earliest concept of proof of stake was trying to have everything managed in a smart contract, the entire validator set, to have all of everything done on chain. And that was difficult because then you have validators are paying gas, and then what do you do when there's gas spikes and validators are like, well, I can't afford that? Then you don't have liveness, which was critical for Ethereum. So this can never go down, so we need to come up with another solution.
Wait, I want to ask about that. So when you say like having everything, this is a part of the Ethereum like spec history that I'm not familiar with. So when you say that everything went through a smart contract, what specific like validation was being done through a contract versus like at kind of the protocol client level?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, but it at a minimum, it was managing the set of validators, like who's in there, what their balance is. It might have even been submission of votes as a transaction to that smart contract. That would be, let's say it was, because that's the worst thing you could think of. Now, I think other blockchains who are doing like votes are also transactions, and they have really, really cheap gas or really, really cheap fees because they scale more horizontally. Like they've just thrown more compute power at it. And I may incorrectly say this, but I think that's what Solana does, is like each of their vote is actually a transaction that the validators actually do have to produce, but their fees are so low that, I mean, or they're making so much they don't care. I don't really know. I'm not really familiar with that, but it wasn't going to work for Ethereum. So we had to pivot. And because Prysm, the team, was so eager to do it, we had already started heavily investing in that idea. So we threw away a bunch of code and deleted a bunch of code and then started over. And that happened at least twice, maybe 3 times. But it wasn't until like, I think we launched the Beacon chain in December of 2020. I think it wasn't until like within 6 months of that date that we actually had a frozen final spec, and that we were spending a lot of time of, verifying that we did the spec, we implemented the spec correctly, which is hard to do. And that after we verified it, we didn't break it, and that we ironed out all the little bugs, because every programming language has its own little quirks. And what we were having a problem with is concurrency. And you have a lot of things happening at once with a blockchain, messages coming in, things you're trying to process, blocks verifying, and you need to have different ideas of the state of the world for different messages. Like maybe you have a message that's for the previous block and you already have a new block. So managing all these things in memory and doing them in parallel was a little bit difficult at first. And we kept running into things like deadlocking scenarios where the node would get stuck waiting for something to happen, whether both things are waiting for each other to respond. So nobody responds and then you're just stuck. And that happened a lot. We had cache issues where like you had this expensive piece of work that you don't want to do again, so you store it in memory. But if you store the wrong thing there, then now you have this wrong result that just really messes with what you're trying to do next. Those were the most painful, because you get a user report and you'd ask them, I don't even know how you even ask them for that data, because as soon as they restarted it, the condition was cleared and it was gone. You had that. You had like disk space issues. So like the database is getting filled with stuff we actually didn't need. We were keeping around every state all the time, I think, and naively at first, and then trying to explore other ideas of how do we manage multiple copies of the state, especially when it gets big, several, I think, gigabytes. Or at this point, the validator set is over 1 million validators. They're not all active, but their number is over 1 million, and they have a entry in the state forever. So it's just big structs and data to deal with. So it was a lot of that. And then, once mainnet launched, it was hard to sleep at night for a little while. But after a few months, like, okay, nothing bad is happening, and got easier to go along. But then one day something bad did happen. I don't know if you guys remember the first time we had an issue on mainnet. This is before the merge, just proof of stake. But Prysm stopped producing blocks suddenly once. All the Prysm validators had the same bug at the same time. And this is when client diversity really saved us, because this could have gotten really nasty if we didn't have other people producing blocks. Because what you're afraid of is you get into something called a death spiral, which is as scary as it sounds, is that when every time you don't produce a block, it becomes a little bit harder to produce the next block, because you have to like do all these state transitions and whatnot. And if you get too far away, it gets to a point where nobody can produce a block because it's too hard to do it in the 12 seconds you have. And if we didn't have client diversity in this case, we would have gone down that death spiral, and then you need like some kind of social coordination or whatever. And it would have put such a bad image on proof of stake that we may have never merged, because they say, oh, it fell over and it died. And we had to go resuscitate it. Like, how are we supposed to switch mainnet, which is powering, hundreds of billions of dollars of value? Thankfully it didn't. So, but the issue was that Prysm had this weird bug where it was not agreeing on some information about ETH1 at the time. So ETH1, ETH2. And it wasn't agreeing about some information at the time. And it had to do with votes. So it had to do with these votes where like I think it was just voting on whatever the last person voted on. And if the first person in the round had voted on junk, which is default behavior when you just don't know what to vote for, you just say, oh, I'm going to vote for nothing, like junk data. Then it would get so big that that vote would win the round. And so the next block proposer, Prysm, feels obligated to say, okay, I have to include that junk into my block, and it doesn't build. It doesn't verify because
that's not a valid transaction.
It's not a valid.
Data.
Yeah, it had to do with deposits. Like it was like the Merkle root of the latest deposits at the time, and it was a junk root. So Prysm was unable to produce blocks until the next round had ended. So when this was happening, it was really difficult to troubleshoot because everything would be on fire. We'd all be freaking out, and then all of a sudden it would stop and go back to normal. Say, was it over? Is it over? I don't know. It was like having an earthquake, and then it's finally over, and then there's an aftershock. It happens again, and we're still not sure what's going on. It took us, I think, 2 days, maybe it was 30 hours, something like that. But we were up all night, just kind of sleeping in shifts, like trying to understand from afar what in the world is going on. Why is it not working? In hindsight, we know it's pretty obvious what the problem was, but trying to debug a decentralized distributed network is really difficult because you don't even know who to ask for like information, like who's running the validator side. Maybe for some well-known people we know, but at-home stakers, can you send me your logs, please? There's like an open message. I don't know who you are, but help. It's tricky. But that was the first time we ever had a problem, and I don't know. Ever since then, things have been pretty stable. But it was a scary time, and it was tough.
You mentioned client diversity. Of course, it's like the saving grace there. For a while, the client diversity for consensus clients was pretty bad. I think Prysm had a huge percentage of share there. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that changed over time and sort of how you think about that?
Yeah. So the idea of client diversity is that if there was a bug in any of the clients, like a showstopper bug, it wouldn't be a showstopper bug because other clients would sort of take over, and the blockchain would continue progressing and things would continue happening. And if it was so bad that we just had to abandon that client, we have options to choose from. Maybe you're only offline for an hour while you're talking to the team and they say it's going to take us a week to figure this out. Well, I'll go run something else. It's no problem. And then you can get back to a healthy state even faster. So this works unless you have like a super majority, what we call it. If you have too much of the network running that singular client that it's not able to recover from without a lot of people coordinating and switching and kind of paying attention. The way proof of stake works is that you need 2/3 to agree on something for it to be finalized, right? So if you have any network that is over that 2/3 threshold, the network cannot finalize and it cannot progress in proof of stake. We would consider that a liveness failure. Even though blocks are being produced, they're not getting finalized, we're not getting enough votes. That's a big problem. So what you really want is you want actually mini client implementations where all of them have less than 1/3 of the market share. So this was a really interesting problem to have as a client developer or a software developer or just somebody who owns a product, builds a product, says, damn, my stuff is too popular. It's too successful even. You might even say that word. It was too good. It felt good and also felt bad because we had to endure, I think, a year of everybody saying, stop using Prysm. You're putting the whole network at risk. Like, what? Like, stop using Prysm. It's great. It's excellent. And at first it was, I think, objectively the best choice because we were there first. So we had a little bit of a lead time to build out some of the features and stability. But that after some time wasn't true anymore. I think that all clients sort of have very similar performance. So when people are like looking at like, which client do I choose? Which one's going to make me the most money? You really have to zoom way in on this chart and say, oh, I could get a couple more GUI if I use Lighthouse than I do Prysm. But so we're not finding that that's a really compelling argument anymore. say, don't choose the most popular client because you're putting yourself in this basket that if something does go wrong, you're going to be one of the ones that are having the liveness penalties, which if it's a super majority, you're going to be heavily, heavily penalized as things go on, because the penalties increase exponentially as time goes on, because we're trying to beat that death spiral and get back to liveness as quickly as possible. So you don't want to do that. And the counter argument to that is, well, everyone's using this one, so it must be the best. Like, it's been evaluated. So it's kind of hard to dismiss that opinion. But now we're saying, look, all the clients are performing very well. They all have very good stability, very good comparable profitability. It really boils down to now just making it easy to switch for people. We try to make it as easy as possible because, we really want to relay this importance of client diversity. It is true that the fate of the network does depend on it in certain scenarios where a fatal bug happens, like client A or Prysm decides it won't produce blocks for whatever reason. You need to have that alternative, and client diversity is really important.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting in the context of other types of conversations that we've seen around liquid staking and other things, where to some degree it feels like, particularly for organizations that are building consensus clients, because you're not explicitly for profit, I guess, it feels like there's also just more space to be doing what's feels like it's for the better of Ethereum versus like having to sort of pigeonhole yourself into justifying. I'm not saying this is what certain orgs do or don't do, but it does feel like the sort of economic model behind these pieces of like almost public good infrastructure perhaps change the way that you can go about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And another unique thing about the Prysm team is that we had no other motive at all. Like, everybody else was like, oh, we're part of consensus, which is building all of these things. We were literally doing one thing only, and that was to build a client. And people also found that attractive when choosing. They're like, oh, well, it's not going to just get shut down because it's not making enough money for the business. Like, that was the only thing we were doing. So people had, I don't know, confidence in that, or felt that we were trustworthy, or what. But that was a unique advantage that we had, or different feature that we had.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so fast forward post merge, things have gone pretty well since. I appreciate you going through the war stories of the Prysm bug. Has there been anything since then, like post merge?
There have been a couple minor issues and a few scares here and there. Some things that could have been an issue, but we caught it in time and then had to hide it. It's a really, really weird space to be in, where when you find, let's say you found a bug that you could exploit that would make all Prysm nodes crash at once. You just send them this message and they crash. How do you fix that without telling the world that you found it? The Geth team has mastered this technique of, they have these really big pull requests, and then they're able to hide that one line in there. And then like later they'll be like, by the way, you really need to update, and we've already released it. You really need to do it. But yeah, we've had a few of those, and the merge itself was terrifying, honestly, because it wasn't just that, we had proof of stake running, but it was, now we're putting all of this value behind it. I mean, the beacon chain was securing a lot of value already, but it was now all of Ethereum was going to be secured by proof of stake. And so that itself was terrifying. But somehow we did it, and it's been over a year and nothing bad has happened. I think there was one, I can't remember exactly what happened, but there's one incident where you'll see this sort of a drop in participation. And I think we had one epoch where it didn't finalize right away, but it was still justifying pretty quickly, and then it recovered pretty quickly. I don't recall the exact issue, but it wasn't as big of a deal as the Prysm one, where like 50% of blocks just stopped showing up. That was intense. But yeah, things have been very, very stable, and life has been very good ever since the merge.
This is kind of a dumb question, but it's funny because you are hyper aware, more so than even people who do follow the space, about like every single thing that could go wrong. Are you sometimes just surprised that things seem to be going right for as long as they have been?
Yeah, yes. Yes. Sometimes we really feel that way. Like when the merge happened, we knew what the outcome was going to be, but that it went off like perfectly and that there were no scary red lines or like logs going off or things going crazy, that it was just a non-event. Like if we weren't having a party to watch it, we would have just not even noticed that it even happened. And that was just like, wow, like it just, I knew that's what was going to happen. I was still afraid though that it wasn't going to be like that. And then when it did, I was just blown away. That a lot of emotions on that day, because we've been working so hard on this for years. Like it was on the roadmap before Ethereum launched. And then we, personally had been working on it for 3 or 4 years, like nonstop. Like it literally changed my life, how much I was working on it. For that all to come through and it for just be flawless in the way it did and be a non-event, it was surprising was one thing. I was surprised, I was shocked, I was proud. It was nuts.
Yeah, the couple of weeks prior during the like test forks, there was always like a small little configuration bug or just like, mostly easy to fix, but there was always kind of something that was happening in each of those little tests. And then I think we only had like one or two all green tests, and then it was go time. Yeah, I stayed up for it. It was a little spooky, but I'm also glad that it worked out.
It was really spooky because it's so complex. It's hard to really know every edge case that might happen. And we were making releases like within that month, or maybe even like 2 weeks was the latest we pushed out one. And we were nervous about some clients, and we were just nervous in general. And we had done so many tests, and some tests had failed spectacularly because we put a 1 instead of a 0, or you forgot a flag, or like just operator error. That was what we're finding. A lot of it was operator error. I'm like, man, like I know the code works, but what if we just fuck it up? Like, what if like everything was perfectly done and we, formally verified everything, and then still we just like fucking forgot to update the client and it didn't do it, and then we're all sad, but that didn't happen. So life is good.
That is kind of the funniest version of an error, which is just the code is perfect and the people are not, which is ultimately.
It's also the harder problem to solve too.
Yes,
Yep.
Yes. And of course, now, sort of fast forward to, I think this happened last year, Prysm was acquired by Offchain Labs, which is the team behind Arbitrum. Maybe you can give a little bit of context on that acquisition and the sort of support there from Arbitrum.
Yeah, I love talking about this. It's been a really exciting step in our journey to join the Offchain Labs. They are amazing group of people, very smart, and obviously have an amazing product with Arbitrum. It's a really great L2, one of the most popular ones. And this came together really organically, actually. So the Ethereum roadmap had pivoted quite a bit in the last few years, where we started out working on sharding. The idea was we wanted to scale. That's what my mission was. And me and Raul got together and said, we really need to make this faster and cheaper to use. And we ended up, switching to proof of stake, which is amazing feat to do. But it wasn't what we set out to do. We set out to scale. And so the roadmap had changed. It said, well, what if we didn't do sharding? That's sort of what we were asking ourselves recently. What if we just didn't do it, and then we would be done? And then say, well, then how are we going to scale? Well, there's these L2s out there that are really gaining a lot of popularity. So what if we just made those cheaper to use, right? And then we could take this thing, which is already happening or going to happen anyway, and make it easier and cheaper to use. So roadmap pivoted to, let's make the data that L2s need to store and benefit from Ethereum's security. What if we made that cheaper? And so these L2s could also innovate faster and move more quickly. And they do have a lot of users. So let's support that. That was sort of on the roadmap anyway, but it was supposed to come later. So what if we just did that? And so that's what the roadmap was looking like. And we were seeing a lot of synergies with L2. Say, well, we're going to need to work really closely with them, and they are going to need to work really closely with us. So it's just a really, really good fit. And the Arbitrum team, they use a lot of similar technologies we use. They're heavily based on a Go Ethereum client, and we're a Go shop. So a lot of brain power would be utilized at Offchain Labs. There will be a day, hopefully one day, where we put Prysm in maintenance mode. It's done its job. It's securing the network, and we're not really adding a lot of new features. Like the roadmap is to be L1 as this like settlement layer, and we're sort of done messing with it and upgrading it, and it's just sort of there. And then we could take all of this amazing brain power and talent that we've found over the few years and continue building and scaling and working on Ethereum through L2, that being like Arbitrum ideas and research through Offchain Labs. We've been with them over a year now, and it's just been awesome. Such talented people and so fun to work with. And one of the biggest improvements is that, we don't have to worry about running a business anymore and thinking about how we're going to have to make money. It was always in the back of our heads over the years of like, yeah, these grants are amazing. And they're like, how is this real life? Like, is this too good to be true? And we were just afraid of the day of like, okay, the grants are not coming anymore. So we have to make some difficult choices, which would be like, do we monetize somehow or get distracted from our goal with some profitability measure to carry forward the open source nature of the business? Thankfully, with joining Offchain Labs, they are now sponsoring L1 development and investing in Ethereum, and we don't have to worry about that anymore. We just get back to work, which is what we want to do and do best. So it's just all around been a really, really great integration.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too. It's very symbiotic. Like the L2 can't exist without the L1, so it totally makes sense. Like they have every incentive to make sure that it continues and is maintained properly. So I am glad that you've made it past the where will my next paycheck come from days.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. It sounds like you've mainly been writing Go like since you got into Ethereum. And I know you have other experience in like TypeScript. It sounded like maybe even some Java. I wanted to like maybe spend the last couple of minutes here, zoom back out, talk about the preferences that you've developed as a dev over the years, anything that you might have learned now having worked with a few different programming languages, and really just like any nuggets of wisdom that you care to bestow upon us having now just had experience in a lot of different areas.
Well, one of the biggest takeaways from being a software developer over the years is that the language is really the tool to get the job done, and not every tool is right for the job you need to do. So once you get to that understanding, you can have some preferential favoritism for particular languages, but also understanding that every language has a purpose and a place and a usefulness. And when I started doing that, I started to be a lot happier because I really don't like working with Java or like certain languages. Like I don't like Python at all, but the Ethereum spec is like literally written in Python as a spec and also as a reference implementation. So I had to be exposed to it often. So I shouldn't dislike it. I should kind of maybe even like it. I don't like it still, but I recognize that it has a really good utility there and that you can prototype quickly and that it's easy to read and that if you don't make any mistakes, then it just works. I strongly prefer like strongly typed languages where I want the compiler to yell at me often. So Rust seems like a good candidate for me. I haven't really gotten hooked on it yet, but the Rust programming language they invested a lot of time in trying to make it, I don't know, idiot proof so that you won't even get to production with a really stupid bug. The compiler will yell at you and say, hey, if you do this, you're putting yourself in grave danger. And it also giving you this powerful ability to manage memory and to do things that are really sophisticated. So it's like C++ in that respect, that you can do anything you want to do, but it has a lot of safeguards to keep you from shooting yourself in the foot. And my advice would be is to go learn a lot of languages and don't get hooked on to one. You should be really good at least one, but recognize that they all have their purpose and they all have their place, and learn a little bit about all of them. Because if you're working on a team or an organization that's dealing with a lot of different languages, you'll provide value in doing code review. And if you understand the code, then you can help review that. So go learn everything and master at least one of them.
I love that. As a sort of way to wrap up, so it sounds like learning lots of different languages and being familiar with them is one piece of advice. I'm curious, for people who are devs who want to contribute more to the space, what would your words of wisdom be? Maybe even how they can contribute in sort of the Prysm sphere of things. Yeah, curious to hear your take on that.
Yeah, Prysm was built on community members and for community members. And we try to maintain that still to this day, to have it open and inviting. If you want to be a part of Ethereum, working on Ethereum's core protocol, Prysm has a lot of open issues and a lot of things that can be improved. So do other clients as well. So like I was saying, don't get stuck on one language. You can think of a feature that might be great for Ethereum proof of stake and go apply it to multiple clients. That would be amazing. If you're not interested in core development, you're more in the application layer. Well, there's a lot of really interesting ideas, and in DeFi space, DeFi is still really exciting. We being the community, do a lot of like hackathons. Like ETH Global does a lot of hackathons, and I'm always inspired by the people that hack at those. Some of the ideas they come with are just absolutely amazing. And a lot of projects that we see on mainnet today have actually started as hackathon projects that people saw value and they took to production, and maybe they got funding by some of the companies that were sponsoring the hackathon. And, my advice is to go there hungry to learn something and a desire to make an impact, and that just everything else will come after that. If you go out seeking to make a quick buck, like maybe you will, but it's not going to be a net positive for anybody but yourself. So think about being part of the bigger picture and contributing. Ethereum is really welcoming and a really great community. So I welcome anybody to contribute. And if you're stuck, have open DMs on Twitter. You can ping me or find me on email or Telegram or somewhere, and I will personally help you find a place to go.
Love that.
Love that.
Yeah. Plus one to hackathons too. Yeah, ETH Global is a big one. Shout out to, is it Biddlebox? They spun out of Gitcoin. Very cool.
Cool.
Remote friendly hackathon.
Also, big plus one to how you can help the community. Sort of like an ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country type of vibe. But for the Ethereum community, one thing that I feel like I've learned across the space is just that if you have the community more broadly in mind, they will take care of you and it will get you a lot further than being extractive. So yeah, love all of that advice. Preston, this was such a lovely conversation. Where can people find you on the internet, and where can they learn more about Prysm?
Yeah, thanks for having me. You can find us on GitHub. It's github.com/Prismatic Labs. We need to update that, actually. It's kind of out of date, but you can find us there for now. On Twitter, Offchain posts about us, and I'm on there, Preston_Van Loon. Our website is still prismaticlabs.com. We really got to update this, but you can find us on the internet. Quick search, we'll be able to find it. We're happy to chat on Discord or anywhere you can find us.
Beautiful. Preston, thanks so much for coming on the pod.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Preston.